The building is not asleep. It only pretends to be. After midnight, the records office exhales differently. The fluorescent lights do not hum so much as they breathe, a shallow, uneven rhythm that never quite settles. Rows of filing cabinets stretch into shadow, their metal faces dulled by decades of fingerprints and neglect. The air smells faintly of dust, toner, and old glue, paper that has outlived the people who typed it. There is one clerk on duty. He did not volunteer for the shift. No one ever does. Night work in a records building is assigned quietly, like a penalty no one argues with. He sits at a desk meant for two people, under lights that are too bright for the hour and too weak for comfort. A chipped mug of cold coffee rests near his elbow. He hasn't touched it in a while. The clock on the wall clicks forward. 01:17. He flips through a ledger, not really reading, just confirming that the day has ended the way it was supposed to. Nothing unusual, nothing out of sequence. That is the job. Make sure time behaved. Then there is a sound. Paper. Not tearing, not falling, sliding. A soft, deliberate whisper as a sheet moves across the surface of the desk in front of him. He freezes. The sound is wrong in a way he cannot immediately explain. Paper does not move like that on its own. There's no draft. The windows are sealed shut, painted closed years ago. The air conditioning system shut down at 11. The desk was empty. He knows this because he cleared it himself. Habit, a small ritual at the end of each hour. Align the ledger, push in the chair opposite him, wipe the surface with his sleeve. Now, there is a letter. Just one. Centered. He does not reach for it. His eyes move first, slowly, as if his hands have decided not to exist for a moment. The paper is off-white, heavier than standard office stock. No envelope, no address, no return mark. It looks like it has already been handled, but not recently. The edges are softened, as though it has passed through many hands or through time itself. The room is silent again. Too silent. He listens for footsteps in the hall, for the elevator, for a door, anything that would explain how paper arrived where no one had been standing. Nothing. The clock ticks. 01:18. He swallows. There is a stamp in the upper right corner of the letter. Red ink, slightly smeared, the way stamps always are when pressed by a tired hand. Received. Below it, a date. He leans forward despite himself. The date is tomorrow. Not tomorrow in the vague sense, tomorrow with precision. Day, month, year. A date that has not happened yet. For a moment, his mind tries to rescue him. A misprint, a joke, someone from another department playing a stupid trick to break the monotony of the night shift. He almost laughs, almost, because the alternative requires believing something else entirely. He checks the clock again. 01:18. The date on the stamp is still wrong. His fingers finally move. They hover above the paper, close enough that he can feel the faint chill of it, like stone left in shade. He hesitates. There's a childlike instinct in him, old and embarrassed, telling him that touching it will make something final, that as long as the letter remains untouched, it is not fully real. But procedures exist for a reason. Unattended documents must be logged. Unmarked items must be cataloged. Everything must be placed somewhere. That is how chaos is kept out. He lifts the letter. It is heavier than it should be. Not physically, no, but in the way it resists explanation. The paper does not bend easily. It holds its shape, stiff and unyielding, as if it expects to be preserved. The underside of the sheet is warm. Not hot, just not cold. He does not like that. He turns it over. There is no writing on the back. No signature, no watermark, no institutional seal beyond the stamp. It is, in every technical sense, incomplete. His mouth is dry. He reaches for the ledger, flips to the correct page, and pauses. His pen hovers above the line where the item description should go. "What are you?" he whispers. The sound of his voice startles him. It feels intrusive, like speaking in a church after hours. He writes anyway. Unidentified correspondence, single sheet, no envelope. He stops. How do you log a date that does not exist yet? His pen scratches out the line. He writes it again, slower this time, leaves the date field blank. A small rebellion. The letter does not protest. He opens a drawer beneath the desk, the one used for temporary intake. Inside are manila folders, color-coded tabs, a place for everything waiting to be assigned meaning. He selects a folder without thinking. The tab reads, MISC. Of course it does. As he slides the letter inside, he notices something else. The stamp ink has not fully dried. When he pulls his fingers back, there is a faint red smear on his skin. The clock ticks. 01:19. He wipes his hand on his trousers, annoyed at himself for the reaction. Ink, just ink. Still, the feeling lingers, like he has touched something living. The drawer closes with a dull, final sound. Metal on metal. For a moment, he just sits there, staring at the seam where the desk meets the drawer, waiting for something else to happen, waiting for the building to acknowledge what has just occurred. Nothing does. The lights continue their shallow breathing. The clock keeps moving forward, loyal and indifferent. Somewhere deep in the building, pipes shift as they cool. He exhales. This is how strange things get power, he tells himself. By being treated as strange, by being stared at too long. If you file them, if you reduce them to paperwork, they lose their grip. He stands, stretches, and walks to the filing cabinets along the far wall. His footsteps sound too loud. He does not like that either. The cabinets are labeled in careful black lettering. Decades of classifications, reorganizations, renamings, entire lives reduced to drawer numbers. He returns to the desk. He should lock the drawer. He does. The key turns, smoothly, obedient. Still, he cannot shake the feeling that the building is paying attention now, that something has been placed on the scales and the balance has shifted just enough to be noticed. He sits back down. 01:20. There are still hours left in the shift. He opens the ledger again and pretends to read. The drawer remains closed. For now, somewhere inside it, a file waits to be opened. And somewhere outside of time, a date quietly becomes real.
The drawer opens without resistance. There's no creak, no protest from the rails, just the quiet sound of metal separating from metal, as if the desk has been waiting. Inside, the folder sits where it was placed. Manila, unremarkable. The tab now reads File 005, typed, not handwritten. The clerk does not remember typing it. There is no memory of a label printer warming up, no sound of adhesive being pressed into place, but there it is. Files are given numbers every day. Numbers mean order, control, sequence. This one follows 4 others that no longer exist, their contents transferred, destroyed, or lost in reorganizations no one remembers authorizing. File 005 remains. When it is opened, there is no single document waiting inside. There never is. Instead, there are fragments. A thin stack of intake logs comes first, clipped together with a rusted paper fastener. The earliest page is stamped twice, once in blue, once in red, as though someone changed their mind halfway through the motion. The handwriting is careful but unfamiliar.
The sender field is blank, not redacted, blank. Someone noticed. There is a penciled note in the margin. Sender unknown. Confirm later. Later never came. The intake logs are followed by internal memos, not originals, copies. Carbon duplicates with faded text, the letters thinning towards the edges like breath on glass. Names appear and disappear behind black rectangles. Departments are referenced only by initials. Dates are consistent, at least at first. The language is administrative, controlled, afraid of sounding curious. Please advise. Further review requested. Recommend holding pending clarification. No one ever clarifies. Further down, the tone shifts, subtly. A memo dated 3 weeks after intake uses a different template. The header is misaligned. The margins are narrower, as if the person typing it was in a hurry or unfamiliar with the machine. Clerical staff report difficulty maintaining objectivity while handling file 005. No explanation follows, just a signature, initials only. The ink is pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath it. The correspondence that comes next is worse. Redacted letters, entire paragraphs erased, not with a marker, but with precision. Thin white strips pasted over the text, leaving raised lines you can feel with your fingers. Someone went to great effort to remove words rather than destroy the page. One letter contains only a greeting and a closing, no body. Another has the body intact, but no recipient. The address field has been cut out entirely, leaving a rectangular wound in the paper. The edges are uneven, as if done with a blade not meant for office work. The sender field, again, is empty. Not known, not classified. Empty. At the back of the folder is a sealing notice, a single page, clean, formal, typed on heavier stock than the rest. It explains that file 005 has been sealed by internal directive. There is no reference to criminal activity, no mention of national security, no risk assessment. The reason given is discomfort, not danger, not scandal, discomfort. The notice does not define the word, it does not justify it. It treats discomfort as a self-evident condition, like gravity or decay. Attached to the notice are personnel records, requests for reassignment. One clerk reports persistent unease, another uses the phrase difficulty sleeping. A third, more careful, writes only that they no longer feel suitable for night intake duties. All requests are approved, quietly. No exit interviews are included, no follow-up notes, just stamps. Approved, approved, approved. The supervisors' names appear less frequently as the file progresses. When they do appear, they are often replaced within months. Transfers, early retirements, one sudden medical leave with no return date. No one writes an explanation. No one signs their full name anymore. Dates continue to accumulate. Some are out of order. Others repeat. One memo is stamped with the same date twice, months apart, as if the day itself had been reused. There's a page near the middle of the file that does not belong to any category. No letterhead, no stamp, just a sheet of plain paper with a single line typed at the center. This file does not want to be completed. The line is underlined. No one claims authorship. The page is not referenced anywhere else in the archive. When the file was reviewed during a routine audit years later by staff who were not present at intake, the note was flagged. A comment was added in the margin. Remove non-standard material. It was not removed. The audit report itself is included in file 005, folded once, then unfolded again, as if someone changed their mind about where it belonged. The reviewer notes anomalies in documentation continuity and unresolved origin fields. They recommend further investigation. They do not conduct it. After that, the file stops growing. Not officially sealed. Sealed things still receive addenda, but abandoned. It exists in a state of suspended relevance. Not closed, not active, just present. When clerks speak of it, if they speak of it at all, they do so indirectly. "That one," they say, or "nothing." It becomes known for what it does not contain. No photographs, no recordings, no statements from witnesses, no victims named. Only the absence of a sender, reoccurring dates, and the quiet pattern of people stepping away from it. There are no recorded incidents, no documented breakdowns, no formal complaints, which makes the discomfort harder to categorize. The archives prefers things that can be indexed. Discomfort cannot. At some point, no one remembers when, a policy is added. File 005 is to be handled by a single clerk per shift. No sharing, no collaborative review. If transfer is required, the file must be placed on the desk, not handed directly from one person to another. The policy is unsigned. It works. Years pass. The building changes, paint peels, departments merge and split, software replaces ledgers, then is replaced again. File 005 survives each transition, migrating from shelf to shelf, system to system, always intact, always incomplete. When digital cataloging begins, the file resists. The scanner jams on its pages. The metadata fields refuse to populate correctly. The sender field autofills with corrupted characters that have no meaning in any language used by the system. The entry is reverted to manual notation, pending. Eventually, someone stamps the front of the folder again. Received. The date is correct this time, but it is written in a different hand, and the ink never dries. File 005 remains sealed, not because it threatens what is inside the archive, but because it unsettles the people who keep it. It asks something of them, without saying what. It reminds them that records are not neutral, that paper remembers being touched, that silence, once documented, becomes part of the record forever. The file waits. Unopened drawers do not forget. They listen.
Before the letter existed, the city moved in straight lines. Morning trains arrived on time often enough that lateness still felt exceptional. Office lights came on floor by floor like a slow awakening. People queued for coffee with folded newspapers under their arms, trusting the headlines to tell them what mattered and the clocks to tell them when. It was a year built on routines. Mail rooms opened at 8, always 8. Metal shutters lifted, sorting tables were wiped down, bins were labeled in block letters, internal, external, urgent. Hands moved quickly, practiced, almost gentle. Envelopes were stacked by size and weight, not by what they carried. Paper had a gravity then. A letter was not noise, it was not clutter, it was an event. Offices depended on it. Notices arrived announcing approvals, denials, transfers, closures. A single page could end a career or begin one. A stamped envelope could mean a mortgage approved, a visa rejected, a program terminated without appeal. People learned to read the weight of paper before the words. Thick envelopes were dangerous, thin ones were final. There was trust in the system, not the naive kind, but the practical kind, the kind that comes from repetition. Stamps were applied by trained hands, dates were aligned, signatures followed protocols. If something arrived through official channels, it had already passed through layers of verification invisible to the recipient. At least, that is what everyone believed. Mail clerks were invisible figures in this arrangement. They wore the same neutral expressions day after day, moving correspondence from one place to another without comment. They did not read the letters. That was understood. Reading would have made them participants. Instead, they were conduits. The city relied on this restraint. In government offices, the sound of paper was constant, drawers opening, files being set down, pages being turned. It was a language of administration, and everyone learned to speak it fluently. You did not ask why something was stamped, you asked where it was filed. Bureaucracy was not admired, but it was respected. It kept things from spilling. Letters meant confirmation, they meant closure. They meant that something uncertain had been decided somewhere else by someone unseen, and all that remained was to acknowledge it. A notice of denial was still a relief, at least it ended waiting. No one questioned official paper because there was no reason to. Forgery existed, of course, but it was crude and rare. Real documents carried themselves differently. The ink was right, the margins were right, the tone was impersonal in a way that could not be convincingly imitated. Official letters did not explain themselves, they did not apologize, they stated, and people adjusted their lives accordingly. In apartments across the city, envelopes were opened over kitchen sinks, over desks cluttered with receipts, over beds that had not yet been made. Hands shook sometimes they didn't. Either way, the paper decided something. A woman learns her application has been approved and begins packing before she finishes the second paragraph. A man reads a single sentence and sits down slowly as if the floor has moved. A department head receives notice of restructuring and understands immediately who will not be staying. The system did not need to be kind, it needed to be consistent, and it was. Stamps mattered, dates mattered. A received mark meant accountability. It meant someone, somewhere, had acknowledged existence, that a request had entered the machinery and would not simply vanish. Paper was how the city remembered itself. Archives were not places of mystery then. They were practical spaces. Poorly lit, yes, overcrowded, often, but honest. Files waited patiently. Boxes were labeled. If something could not be found, it was assumed to be misfiled, not missing. Loss had explanations. Human error, flooding, fire. There were forms for all of it. The idea that a letter could arrive without origin, without a sender, did not occur to anyone. Systems were built to prevent that exact thing. Every intake log had a field. Every field had a purpose. Blank spaces were invocations for correction. Someone would notice. Someone always did. In those days, clerks took pride in precision. A well-kept ledger was a quiet accomplishment. A correctly closed file meant the world was behaving. Even discomfort had a place. Complaints were logged, grievances were categorized, emotional responses were translated into checkboxes and forwarded to the appropriate department. There was comfort in that translation. Feelings became manageable once they were reduced to forms. The city was not innocent. It knew grief. It knew injustice. It knew that systems failed people all the time, but it believed those failures were traceable, that causes could be identified, blamed, corrected, or ignored. Nothing arrived without a path. Nothing belonged nowhere. In the evenings, as offices closed, mail rooms emptied, bins were sealed, unclaimed letters were rerouted, the building lights dimmed, cleaning staff moved through the corridors, careful not to disturb stacks of paper that had already decided someone's future. Night shifts existed, but they were quiet, predictable. The work done after dark was maintenance, catching up, filing what had been delayed by the day's urgencies. There were checklists, there were rules. There was comfort in knowing that nothing unexpected was supposed to happen, and for a long time, nothing did. The year moved forward, seasons changed, paper yellowed slightly at the edges, but remained legible. Ink faded at a known rate. Everything aged the way it was expected to. People trusted that if a letter arrived, it belonged, that if it was stamped, it had been seen, that if it was filed, it would stay where it was placed. No one questioned the system because it had not yet given them a reason to. There were no rumors, no whispered stories passed between desks, no files people avoided touching. Just work, just paper, just the quiet faith that order once established would hold. This was the world before the letter existed, before a date could arrive early, before a sender could be absent without explanation, before discomfort had no category. Nothing was wrong yet, and that was precisely why no one was prepared to notice when it began.
The first cracks were small enough to ignore. That is how they survived. A letter arrived without an envelope. Not torn, not damaged, just a single sheet placed among the rest, logged between two ordinary notices as if it had always been that way. The intake clerk hesitated, then shrugged. Envelopes were lost sometimes. They slipped behind sorting tables, fell into bins, were discarded by mistake. Paper moved fast in those rooms. Mistakes happened. He logged it anyway. The sender field was filled with a department code that did not exist anymore, or maybe never had. The handwriting on the letter was neat, almost careful, but unfamiliar. None of the clerks recognized it. That too was not unusual. Thousands of hands passed through the system every month. The letter was filed. A week later, another arrived. This one had an envelope, but no seal. The flap lay flat, uncreased, as if it had never been closed. The stamp was properly placed, the cancellation mark was clean. Everything about it suggested it had traveled through the mail like any other piece of correspondence, except for the fact that no one could explain how it stayed intact. Someone joked that the sender must have trusted the system too much. Laughter followed, short, forced. The clerk logged it. Then came the handwriting. Not identical, no one could prove that, but similar enough to raise eyebrows. Certain letters leaned the same way. Certain strokes ended too sharply, as if the writer had lifted the pen at the last possible moment. The spacing between words felt deliberate, controlled. When three unrelated cases, different departments, different recipients, contained letters with nearly identical phrasing, someone noticed. Not officially, just a comment over a desk divider. "Have you seen this before?" Another clerk leaned over, squinted at the page, and nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said. "Different file, though." They compared notes quietly. Phrases repeated, entire sentences sometimes. Polite, neutral language, nothing alarming on its own, but the repetition felt wrong. Bureaucracy reused language all the time, but this was too precise, too personal in its impersonality. A supervisor was informed. He skimmed the documents, tapped the pages into alignment, and handed them back. "Templates," he said. "Happens all the time. Don't overthink it." Overthinking was discouraged. The work continued. Clerks began to feel it before they could name it, a faint resistance when reaching for certain folders, a sense of being observed that had no source. The letters themselves were not threatening, they did not demand, they did not accuse, they simply existed, asking to be processed, which was worse. One clerk started washing her hands more often, not compulsively, just frequently. She said the paper felt different, drier, warmer. She laughed when she said it, as if embarrassed by her own words. Another clerk refused to log intake after sunset. He swapped shifts whenever he could, citing headaches, eye strain, anything that sounded reasonable. When pressed, he said the letters settled wrong when handled at night. No one wrote that down. Jokes began to circulate. Someone taped a sign above the sorting table, "Check for ghost mail." Another replied by adding a smiley face. Laughter followed. Relief, mostly. Humor was how the unease was defanged. Still, the jokes stayed close to the truth. One employee, quiet, meticulous, began copying certain letters by hand at home. She did not tell anyone at first. She said later that she wanted to see if they changed. She used the same pen, the same paper each time. She compared her copies to the originals line by line. They never changed. That disappointed her more than it should have. She kept the copies anyway, stacked neatly in a drawer beside her bed. She said it helped her sleep knowing she had a version that belonged to her. Another employee refused to touch the letters at all. He was older, close to retirement, and had seen enough anomalies in his career to know which ones were better left alone. When a file containing one of those letters crossed his desk, he pushed it aside with the back of his hand and waited for someone else to take it. No one challenged him. They just worked around him. Supervisors remained dismissive, not cruel, just tired. Complaints were met with nods and vague reassurances. Staffing shortages, they said, stress, too much time staring at paper. The mind invents patterns when it wants distraction. "Take a day off," one supervisor suggested. "You're seeing things." But the letters kept coming. Not many, never enough to trigger alarms, just enough to feel intentional. They arrived in different departments, different cities sometimes, but the intake logs began to show similarities. The same hesitation marks, the same corrections scratched out and rewritten, the blank sender field left unresolved. Someone tried to escalate it once. A formal memo was drafted outlining the irregularities. It was carefully worded, cautious, almost apologetic. The clerk who wrote it revised it 3 times before sending it up the chain. The response came back stamped and signed. Noted, no further action required. The memo was filed. After that, no one tried again. It was easier to keep filing, easier to pretend the system was absorbing the problem, even if no one could see how. Bureaucracy trained people well. If something truly mattered, it would be flagged. If it was not flagged, it must not matter. The letters did not disrupt operations. They did not cause losses that could be measured. They did not break rules loudly enough to be noticed. They only introduced discomfort, and discomfort was not actionable. At night, some clerks reported dreams they could not remember clearly. Just impressions, paper piling up, drawers that wouldn't close, stamps hitting the page over and over, never quite aligning. In the morning, they laughed it off. Coffee helped. Routine helped more. The city outside remained unchanged. Trains ran, offices opened, mail rooms sorted. The system continued to function, which was proof enough for most people that nothing serious was happening. After all, if something were wrong, it would announce itself. It would break something important. Instead, the letters slipped quietly into place, logged and filed like everything else. They waited patiently on shelves, indistinguishable at a glance from 1,000 other documents. The cracks widened slowly, so slowly that no one could say when they began. Only that at some point, the act of filing stopped feeling neutral. It began to feel like participation. And still, no one escalated. No alarm sounded, no doors were closed. They just kept filing, because that is what the system taught them to do, and because stopping would have required admitting that something had already gone wrong.
The arrival time is logged as 10:42 a.m. The notation is neat, confident, written by a clerk who had already processed 14 items that morning and expected the 15th to be no different. The letter arrives with no envelope. It is already loose when it reaches the intake desk, resting atop a stack of interdepartmental notices. No one remembers seeing it placed there. No courier signs for it. No delivery slip accompanies it. At 10:43, the clerk lifts the page. It is heavier than most, not thick, just weighted in a way that makes the wrist adjust unconsciously. The paper is warm, though the room is not. The stamp sits in the upper corner, red and slightly uneven. Received. The date is correct. That detail matters later. At 10:44, the clerk hesitates. This is noted only indirectly by the small pause in the intake log where the handwriting tightens, then loosens again. The sender field is left blank, not crossed out, not marked unknown, just blank. At 10:45, the clerk does something she has not done before. She reads the first line. Not out of curiosity, out of procedure. Unmarked correspondence is supposed to be skimmed for routing. It is not personal reading. It is triage. The first line appears ordinary. Formal greeting, neutral tone. No names. She exhales and continues. At 10:46, she stops. The room is a standard processing office. 4 desks, low partitions, fluorescent lights. The hum is constant, but unobtrusive. Someone is typing. Someone else is sorting carbon copies into folders. A printer whirs, then goes quiet. The clerk clears her throat. She reads the next line aloud, not because she means to, because the words do not sit properly in her head unless they are heard. The letter references a death, not an official one, no certificate number, no hospital, no date. It describes loss in a way that bypasses records entirely. A child who never appeared on any register, a grief that had been folded away because there was no place to submit it. The language is calm, careful, as if the letter understands the rules it is breaking. At 10:47, the typing stops. Someone looks up. "What?" a coworker asked, lightly, half a joke. The clerk does not answer immediately. She reads another line. The letter mentions a night shift, a stairwell, a phone call that did not connect. The clerk's voice changes. Not dramatically, just enough, a slight tightening around the edges of the words. The room listens. At 10:48, someone else recognizes something. A phrase, a description of a waiting room that matches one they remember. Not officially, just emotionally. The color of the chairs, the smell of disinfectant, the way time stretched. They do not speak. At 10:49, the clerk lowers the page. Her hands are shaking now, not visibly, just enough that the paper makes a faint sound when she moves it. This isn't... She does not finish. At 10:50, a supervisor steps closer. He does not take the letter. He stands beside the desk, leaning in slightly, careful not to touch. He reads over her shoulder. The room feels smaller. The letter continues. It references events that were never filed. A miscarriage reported verbally but never logged. A resignation submitted and then withdrawn, except the leaving still happened. A conversation held in a hallway, off the record, where someone was told to let it go because there was no form for what they were describing. The supervisor's jaw tightens. At 10:52, someone begins to cry. It is quiet, contained, a sound that could be mistaken for a cough if no one wanted to acknowledge it. The letter does not accuse. It does not demand apology. It simply lists. It knows. At 10:53, the clerk reads a line that includes her name, not her full name, just the first, common enough to be coincidence, except for the detail that follows. A sentence about a brother who died young, an accident that never resulted in charges, a file that was opened and then quietly closed because responsibility could not be assigned. Her breath catches. She did not tell anyone at work about that. At 10:54, the supervisor raises a hand. "That's enough," he says. His voice is steady, trained. The clerk does not argue. She lowers the page. The silence that follows is heavier than anything that came before. Even the fluorescent lights seem to dim, though they do not. The hum continues, indifferent. At 10:55, someone leaves their desk. They do not say where they are going. They grab their bag and walk quickly toward the exit. Later, it will be noted that they never returned from break. At 10:56, another employee stands and excuses herself. The stairwell door closes softly behind her. She will sit on the steps for 20 minutes, crying into her sleeve, trying to remember how the letter knew about her mother's unanswered complaint, the one she never followed up on because the effort felt pointless. At 10:59, the supervisor takes the letter, carefully, as if it might bruise. He does not read it again. He folds it once, then stops, unfolds it, smooths it flat. "No copies," he says. No one argues. At 10:58, the clerk nods. She feels hollow now, not shocked, drained, as if something has passed through her and taken its time leaving. At 10:59, the letter is placed back on the desk. It looks ordinary again, just paper. At 10 o'clock, the intake log is updated. The description is minimal. Unmarked correspondence. Reviewed. Nothing else. At 10:11, the letter is refiled. The drawer slides shut. No one speaks. At 10:22, the room begins slowly to resume its shape. Someone types again. Someone else clears their throat. The printer whirs. But something has shifted. At 11:05, the supervisor steps into his office and closes the door. He will remain there for the rest of the day. At 11:12, the clerk washes her hands. The water runs longer than necessary. At 11:30, a request for early leave is submitted and approved without comment. By the end of the day, 3 people will go home early. 1 will not come back the next morning. No copies of the letter are ever made, not digitally, not by hand, No one photographs it. No one quotes it directly again. When asked later what it said, the answers vary. It knew things. It mentioned my life. It wasn't supposed to know that. The letter remains filed, unchanged. It does not need to be read again. It has already done what it came to do. The system continues, but from that day forward, every clerk who touches file 005 does so knowing one thing. The letters are not trying to disrupt the archive. They are trying to remember what the archive chose to forget.
Nothing went wrong all at once. That is the most difficult part to accept. There was no single failure, no decisive moment when someone chose the wrong option and everything collapsed around it. What happened instead was quieter, slower, and far more familiar. The process kept moving because it always had. Everyone involved understood their role. Intake clerks logged, supervisors reviewed, files were stored, questions were deferred. Responsibility diffused itself across desks, departments, and years until it no longer belonged to anyone in particular. No one stopped the process because stopping would have required ownership, and ownership in a system built to distribute blame is dangerous. After the letter was read, there were conversations, not meetings, conversations. Brief exchanges in hallways, low voices near the elevators, careful phrasing. No one used the word wrong. They spoke instead of concerns, impact, staff well-being. Language softened the edges. A formal investigation was discussed once, not in writing. A supervisor mentioned it to another supervisor, who nodded and said it might be worth considering. They agreed to revisit the idea after the quarterly review, once things had settled. By the time the review arrived, the urgency had faded. No new letters had appeared. The immediate disruption had passed. Launching an investigation now would mean reopening something that had begun to close itself. The system prefers closure. Fear, when kept private, does not escalate. It fragments. Each clerk carried their own version of it home at night, folded carefully away from partners and children. Some spoke about stress. Others blamed exhaustion. A few said nothing at all, convinced that putting the experience into words would make it sound absurd. How do you explain a piece of paper that knows what was never written down? How do you report grief that never had a case number? Without shared language, fear remained isolated, and isolated fear is manageable, at least on paper. The supervisors told themselves they were protecting their staff. Making it official would invite scrutiny. Scrutiny would demand explanations. Explanations would require admitting that something had slipped through unnoticed for years. Better, they thought, to let it end quietly. And for a while, it seemed to. The letters stopped arriving. No announcement marked their absence. One day, they were simply no longer there. Intake logs returned to their familiar rhythm. Blank sender fields became rare again. The strange repetitions vanished. The archive breathed easier. But the damage did not reverse itself. One clerk resigned 3 months later. Her exit interview cited personal reasons and burnout. Privately, she told a friend that she could no longer touch paper without feeling watched. She took a job in retail. Boxes, she said, were easier. You could see what they held. Another clerk stayed, but changed. He grew quiet, withdrawn. His performance reviews remained acceptable, but his marriage did not. He stopped talking about work entirely, as if sealing it might contain it. His partner noticed the way he flinched at the sound of envelopes hitting the floor. Mental health leave requests increased, though none referenced the letters. Anxiety, insomnia, stress-related conditions, each form approved without comment, filed neatly, stripped of context. Families felt it first. Short tempers, absences at dinner, a pervasive sense of being elsewhere even when physically present. Children learned to not ask certain questions. Spouses learned to accept vague answers. Something unnamed had entered the home. There was one disappearance,
an administrative assistant, not a clerk directly involved with File 00 Hive, but close enough to have heard the stories, close enough to have seen the letter on the desk that day. She left work early one afternoon and did not return home. An investigation was opened, a missing persons report filed. The search followed protocol, posters were printed, phone records examined, leads pursued and exhausted. Nothing connected it to the archive. Officially, there was no reason it should. Unofficially, her colleagues remembered the way she had stared at the letter while pretending not to listen, the way she asked later if anyone knew how it worked, who decided what got remembered. No one wrote that down. The investigation closed months later, unresolved. Another file, sealed for different reasons. What went wrong was not the appearance of the letters. It was the assumption that if they were truly dangerous, someone else would handle them. That is the quiet violence of bureaucratic momentum, the belief that systems flow upward automatically, that systems are self-correcting, that silence, if kept long enough, becomes proof of safety. No one wanted to be the first to say, "This shouldn't exist," because saying that would invite questions no one was prepared to answer. How did it get here? Why didn't we notice sooner? What else have we missed? And most frightening of all, what does it know about us? The archive was designed to record outcomes, not emotions, to document conclusions, not uncertainty. The letters violated that structure by existing in the space between. They carried things that had been lived but never processed, losses that had no forms, endings that were administratively inconvenient. They were reminders that systems do not erase experiences, they only hide them. By the time anyone considered external review, there was nothing tangible left to examine. No new evidence, no ongoing incident, just testimonies that contradicted one another, shaped by memory and stress. The cost had already been paid. Careers altered, relationships strained, a disappearance absorbed into the background noise of unsolved cases, and a file that remained sealed, not because it was active, but because opening it again felt unnecessary, cruel even. The letters stopped. What good would it do to revisit them now? The system moved on. It always does. But something fundamental had shifted, an understanding, quietly shared among those who remained, that the archive was not neutral, that it could be a participant, that what it accepted without question could shape lives long after the ink dried. The letters never returned. No final message, no explanation, just absence. And absence in an archive is never empty. It is a shape, a reminder, a question that no one ever formally asked and therefore never had to answer. If a system is designed to remember everything, what happens when it learns to remember what was never meant to be kept? The damage lingered in the margins, in the pauses before touching a file, in the careful way certain drawers were avoided, in the knowledge that not everything undocumented is forgotten. Some things wait, and silence, once established, is very difficult to undo.
When the letters stopped, the need to explain them did not. Silence creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull at the edges of memory. Years later, when File 005 was reviewed in fragments, never all at once, never by the same person twice, there were attempts to understand what had happened without naming it as something impossible. Not conclusions, theories, careful ones, built to stand without demanding belief. They remain unofficial. They refuse to close. The office does not exist anymore. Not as it did. The building was renovated years later, quietly, without ceremony. Walls came down. Fluorescent lights were replaced with softer fixtures meant to suggest calm. The records division was moved to a different floor, then to a different address entirely. What had once been intake desks and filing cabinets became open-plan workstations, then conference rooms, then something else. Progress has many shapes. People pass through the space now without knowing what it used to hold. They bring laptops instead of ledgers. They talk softly into headsets. The air smells cleaner, newer, less like paper and glue and time. But the floor plan still remembers. There is a corner where sound behaves strangely, a place where footsteps echo longer than they should. Someone once asked why the lighting there always flickers, even after multiple repairs. Facilities blamed wiring. The answer was accepted. It always is. The staff dispersed the way staff always do. Some transferred to other departments, some retired. A few left public service entirely. Their names appear in different systems now, attached to different roles, different routines. Lives continued. They do not speak of File 005, not because of any agreement, because language never quite returned to it. When they do think of it, and some still do, late at night, when paper makes a sound it shouldn't, they remember fragments, a feeling, a moment, the sense that something passed too close. One clerk keeps the habit of checking dates twice. Another never works night shifts again. One refuses to open mail at home, letting it pile by the door until someone else moves it. These are small accommodations, invisible costs. The file itself was never destroyed. There was no directive to do so, no risk assessment justifying removal, no policy violation severe enough to warrant elimination. Destruction requires reason, and File 005 offered none that could be articulated. So it remained. When the archive relocated, the file moved with it, cataloged under a revised system that promised efficiency and transparency. Barcodes replaced labels, digital indices replaced handwritten logs. File 005 resisted that transition too. Its barcode failed to scan consistently. Its digital entry populated incompletely, fields rejecting data without explanation. After several attempts, a note was added. Maintain physical copy. That note persists. The file sits now in a climate-controlled room with shelves that glide silently on rails. It occupies a space between other sealed cases, some criminal, some administrative, some simply unfinished. It looks no different from the rest. Inside, the documents remain as they were. The intake logs, the internal memos, the redacted correspondence, and the final letter. It has never been read aloud again. Not officially. There were discussions years later about reopening the file for review. A new generation of supervisors, less personally affected, argued that enough time had passed, that distance might offer clarity. A meeting was scheduled. It was postponed, then quietly canceled. No reason given. Distance does not guarantee safety. Sometimes it only dulls memory enough to make mistakes repeatable. The final letter remains inside the folder, folded once, then unfolded as it was left that day. The stamp is still visible, received. The date remains correct. That detail still matters. It is acknowledged, logged, accounted for, but unread. Unread not because of fear, exactly. Unread because nothing in the system requires it to be read. Files do not demand attention. They wait. And this one waits particularly well. There is no sender recorded anywhere. No return address ever surfaced. No apology was issued, no explanation appended, no closing memo written to summarize or contextualize the incident. The system moved on. That is what systems do when they cannot metabolize something. They absorb it without digestion. The file did not move on. It remains sealed, not by order, but by inertia, by the quiet understanding that opening it again would not restore what was lost, nor clarify what occurred. It would only ask the same questions. Why did no one stop it sooner? Why did everyone wait for permission that never came? Why did paper, of all things, carry what people could not? These are not questions with procedural answers. They linger in the margins, where systems are weakest. Occasionally, during inventory audits, a junior archivist notices the file. The number draws the eye. 5 is early, incomplete. It suggests context that is missing. They flag it. A senior staff member reviews the flag and clears it. Legacy file, they say. That phrase is sufficient. Legacy implies inheritance without responsibility. The drawer that holds file 005 slides smoothly now, maintained, lubricated, modern. It closes without sound. But it is the same drawer. Metal remembers. The final letter remains inside, stamped and acknowledged, carrying what it carried the first time it was read. It has not changed. It does not need to. It contains no sender, no apology, no explanation. Only recognition. The system prefers endings, conclusions, resolutions it can stamp and file away. This one offered none, so it was set aside. And that may be the most accurate record the archive ever produced. Not everything that arrives can be processed. Not everything that is acknowledged can be understood. Some things enter the system only to demonstrate its limits. The building will continue to change. Staff will come and go. New policies will replace old ones. Software will be updated, then deprecated, then forgotten. File 005 will remain. Unopened, unresolved. A single quiet exception in a structure built on order. The drawer is still there, waiting.